Welcome back to Mechanical Engineering Made Simple.
Thanks for having me.
So, I want you to think about a glacier for a second. If the geological conditions are right, it just moves, inexorably toward the sea.
Like a massive fluid river of rock and ice, yeah.
Right, exactly. And analogously, the field of project management is moving inexorably away from just being about cold, hard numbers.
Yeah.
It's moving toward the fluid, dynamic, human side of the enterprise.
Which is really the ultimate blind spot for highly technical professionals. I mean, if you think about it.
Oh, totally. Because we're trained to solve complex equations, right?
Yeah.
Optimize systems.
Exactly. But you can have all the technical tools in the world, the most rigorous risk models, the best software, and they will not save a project if the people executing the work are just, well, fundamentally mismanaged.
Yeah, the true determinants of project success are overwhelmingly behavioral, which means today we're putting away the PERT charts. Yeah, right. We're taking those massive web-like diagrams that map out task dependencies and just putting them in a drawer. We're shelving the earned value analyses you use to mathematically measure performance.
We're even ignoring the resource leveling tool.
Yep. Today, we are treating this deep dive like a masterclass on the human mechanics of engineering.
I love that phrase, human mechanics.
Thanks. We're going to walk you through a 12-factor model of behavioral issues in project management, starting right at the micro level with the individual and then zooming all the way out to the macro level, like the entire corporate structure.
And we really have to start right at the center of the system, which is the individual project manager.
Because that's where the engine is, right?
Exactly. But it's a very strange engine. If you are sitting in that chair, you're operating within this bizarre paradox of power.
How do you mean?
Well, consider a traditional general manager, right? Or department head. They have formal structural authority. They have real institutional power.
Right. They can hire, fire, promote, give raises.
Yeah. They dictate the terms. But in project manager, they rarely have any of those levers to pull.
Because of how modern engineering firms are structured, right? Like most of you listening probably work in a matrix organization.
Yes, the classic matrix. Imagine the company as a grid.
Okay, so vertically, you have the functional departments like mechanical engineering, software development, marketing.
Right, and each of those has its own boss. But horizontally, you have the projects cutting right across those departments.
So an engineer sitting at their desk basically has two bosses.
Which is a nightmare. They have their functional manager who writes their performance review and the project manager who actually needs them to build the prototype.
And that dual reporting structure just completely strips the project manager of formal power.
It does. You're entirely responsible for the final deliverable, taking all the pressure, but you don't actually own the personnel.
It's like a car's transmission system.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like the transmission is entirely responsible for driving the wheels, but it doesn't actually own the engine.
Right. You're essentially leading a team of borrowed people. So you have to rely on these incredibly diverse characteristics, extreme sensitivity, rigorous planning, technical knowledge.
But without the blunt instrument of formal authority. I mean, I struggled to see how a project manager survives that dynamic without burning out.
It is incredibly taxing, yeah.
If they don't have formal power to hire or fire, why would anyone listen to them?
Yeah.
And are successful PMs born or made at that point?
Well, they definitely have to develop creative ways to lead, because standard corporate bonuses just don't hit the same when the deadline for a new bridge or, an aerospace component is half a decade in the future.
All right, the finish line is just too far away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The typical feedback loops on complex projects are incredibly drawn out, so motivation has to become highly creative, almost guerrilla in nature.
Guerrilla motivation, I like that.
Yeah, because if you're in software sales, you get the dopamine hit of a closed deal every month. But in heavy engineering, you might only know if the project succeeded years later.
When the client is actually actively using it.
Yeah.
So you have to manufacture shorter feedback loops.
Yes, and the sources highlight this amazing real-world example of this that completely bypassed standard corporate rewards. It happened at an entrepreneurial IT consulting company.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So the president of this company was dealing with these off-site project managers. And in IT, turnover is notoriously high, right? The career ladders often lack clear rungs.
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly easy for offsite managers to just feel totally forgotten by the home office.
Exactly. So at a holiday party, this president handed out physical briefcases to 10 of his project managers.
Wait, actual briefcase?
Real briefcases. And inside, each one was exactly 1,000 one-unit bills of physical currency.
Wow.
It's just stacks of singles.
A briefcase packed with 1,000 singles. I mean, that is intense.
It's totally shocking, right? Especially in a sterile corporate environment.
Yeah, completely unexpected.
But the psychological impact was immense because it was a visceral, tactile acknowledgement of their value.
Right. When you're starved for feedback, receiving an abstract direct deposit in your bank account is, like, easily forgotten.
But handing over a briefcase of physical cash, that hits right in the motivation center.
I bet. It showed he saw their invisible low-power struggles.
And it proved highly effective for retaining top talent.
Okay, so you've got a motivated project manager. They've got their briefcase of cash, their drive. But motivation isn't enough if the team ignores you.
Right, you still have to steer the ship.
If they don't have formal power, how do they actually steer? What happens when a borrowed engineer just refuses to follow the timeline?
Well, this brings us to the control system, leadership style, and communication.
Okay, let's get into it.
We need to look at how a leader makes decisions. In our sources, this is mapped out using the Bonomo-Slevin leadership model.
The Bonomo-Slevin matrix.
Yeah. So imagine a two-dimensional grid. The vertical axis, the y-axis, represents information input from the subordinate group.
Like, does the team get a say in what happens?
Exactly. And then the horizontal axis, the x-axis, represents the decision authority of the leader, as in who actually makes the final call.
Got it. So mapping that out gives us 4 distinct leadership styles or quadrants.
Right. So in the bottom right quadrant, you have the autocrat. This is total decision authority for the leader with 0 input solicited from the team.
You simply give orders and expect them to be followed.
Yep. Then, top right, you have the consultative autocrat.
How is that different?
The leader still holds all the final authority, but they actively and genuinely solicit high input from the team before deciding.
Okay, and then on the other side of the grid.
In the top left is the consensus manager. This is shared authority and high input from everyone. The group decides together.
So very democratic.
Very much so. And finally, in the bottom left, you have the shareholder.
Okay, wait, let me stop you at the shareholder quadrants.
Sure.
Low input from the team and low decision authority from the leader. That sounds like a complete disaster.
It usually is.
Isn't shareholder just a fancy corporate word for an absentee boss who has completely ghosted their team?
Honestly, yes. The sources are pretty explicit about this. The shareholder position is literally just poor management.
It creates an information vacuum, right? The group is left to fend for itself.
With no guidance or resources, it's a total failure of leadership. But we map these 4 quadrants out not to pick one perfect style, but to show that a successful PM has to be a chameleon.
Because using the same style for every problem is going to break the project.
Exactly. Consider the life cycle of a complex build. A project manager might need to use an autocratic style when, say, a critical safety issue arises on that manufacturing floor.
Right, if a shutdown decision must be made in 60 seconds, there is no time for input.
None at all. But the very next morning, that same manager might need to switch entirely to a consensus style.
Like when they're sitting down with the senior engineering team to solve some unprecedented thermodynamics problem?
Yes. Everyone's expertise is required there, and dictating an answer would just be foolish. So the control system is all about flexibility.
But flexibility requires flawless communication. And I know a lot of managers today who think, I don't need to worry about my leadership style. I'll just set up a Slack channel and a daily Zoom stand-up.
Ah, yes. The technology trap.
Yeah, they think the communication problem is just automatically solved. But the sources have a pretty harsh warning about that assumption.
They really do. There is a dangerous trap in assuming that modern telecommunications technology automatically equates to better human communication.
It's easy to think, you build a virtual team of 30 highly specialized engineers spread out across 6 global time zones.
Link them up with state-of-the-art teleconferencing, and boom, you assume you've built a super team.
In my experience, that usually makes things significantly worse.
But data absolutely backs you up on that.
Really?
Yeah, the sheer volume of unstructured messages, the exhaustion of scheduling across continents, it's overwhelming.
And the total lack of informal water cooler alignment.
Exactly. That often leads to massive information vacuums. Complex engineering problems require nuanced debate. They require sketching on a whiteboard and reading body language.
Right. Relying purely on virtual tools often creates devastating project delays.
Because the fundamental human elements of communication planning are ignored in favor of the shiny new technology.
Okay, so the leader is communicating flexibly. They're trying to keep the team motivated. But who are they actually talking to?
The raw materials.
Yeah, the team itself. What happens if the people on the other end of that communication are completely unqualified?
Which brings us to the staffing and team dynamics, segment 3 of our model. This is where the reality of the matrix organization becomes quite harsh.
Because the textbook ideal is that a project manager carefully interviews and staffs the brightest minds, right?
That's the dream. The reality on the ground is completely different. Functional managers are highly protective of their best people.
Obviously.
Yeah.
If I'm the head of the software department, my bonus depends on my department's overall output. Why would I give my absolute best senior developer to a temporary project manager for 6 months? I wouldn't.
You would hoard them,
Yeah.
which leads to what the sources call the dumping ground phenomenon.
Oof. Dumping ground. That sounds bad.
It is. When a project manager comes asking for resources, the functional manager might use the project team as a dumping ground for their poorest performers.
Or just hand over whoever happens to be sitting on the bench at that exact moment.
Exactly, regardless of their motivation or their specific technical skill set.
So the PM inherits a team that perhaps doesn't even want to be there, lacks the precise skills needed, and they still have to deliver a flawless product.
And on top of that baseline dysfunction, you have cross-functional rivalries.
Oh, think about the historical warfare between marketing and engineering.
A classic toxic dynamic.
I have seen product development teams where marketing and engineering actively work to discredit each other rather than actually build the product.
It's such a common friction point. Marketing is incentivized to push for new, flashy features to sell immediately.
Right. And engineering is incentivized to push for stability, thorough testing, and manufacturability.
Their cultures and their metrics of success are inherently at odds. But the research points to a few specific ways to fix this.
Okay, what's the fix?
The most powerful tool a project manager has here is the introduction of a superordinate goal.
A superordinate goal. Break that down for us. What actually is that, and why does it stop the infighting?
A superordinate goal is an objective so urgent, so compelling, and so large that it forces joint commitment.
Because it can't possibly be accomplished by one department alone.
Exactly. It's the psychological equivalent of an alien invasion forcing rival nations to unite.
Oh, wow. I love that analogy.
Yeah, if a competitor is about to launch a product that will render your company's entire catalog obsolete and bankrupt the firm, that is a superordinate goal.
It overrides all the petty departmental squabbles.
It completely reorients their survival instincts.
Okay, so you give them this massive shared threat.
Yes, and then you combine that true superordinate goal with physical proximity.
Like a dedicated war room.
Right. You pull key members from marketing and engineering out of their respective departments and stick them in a physical war room together.
And that rapidly breaks down those cultural rivalries.
They stop identifying as marketing or engineering and start identifying as the project team.
Okay, so you have them in the war room. They understand the existential threat of the superordinate goal. Now they have to actually start executing.
Yes, the actual work begins.
And for decades, HR departments have pushed the Tuckman model for team building.
Forming, storming, norming, and performing.
Right, the idea that teams go through those neat, predictable stages.
Well, the research we are looking at completely dismantles that model for natural project settings.
Really? They just throw it out.
Pretty much. Real human beings working under pressure do not gradually and politely evolve through those neat stages.
So what do they do instead?
The sources point to a concept borrowed directly from evolutionary biology, specifically the work of researcher Connie Gersick. It's called punctuated equilibrium.
Using evolutionary biology to explain an engineering team's schedule. Okay, walk us through the mechanism of how that actually works.
So in evolutionary biology, punctuated equilibrium suggests that species remain mostly static for incredibly long periods.
Right.
And then they experience sudden, rapid bursts of evolutionary change due to some environmental trigger.
Okay, and Gersick found this in project teams.
The exact same behavioral pattern. Teams figure out their operating norms very quickly in their first few meetings, and then they just coast.
Just coasting along at a mediocre pace.
Yeah, they operate at a moderate pace for a long period of time.
A long, quiet equilibrium where everyone feels like they have plenty of time.
But then, at exactly the halfway point of the project timeline, almost like clockwork, a psychological trigger goes off.
The midpoint.
The midpoint panic, exactly. The team collectively realizes that their time is finite, and this triggers a massive internal upheaval.
Well, I've seen this. There is panic.
Pent-up frustrations explode, unacceptable group norms are suddenly thrown out the window, and a rapid, intense period of high performance begins.
So it is exactly like a college student coasting through an entire semester, playing video games, and then pulling a frantic, hyper-productive all-nighter when they realize midterms are tomorrow morning.
That is the perfect analogy, yes. The sudden realization of finite time forces a behavioral mutation in the group.
Wow.
A great project manager understands this isn't a failure of the team's discipline, It's a natural biological rhythm of group dynamics.
So if you know that midpoint panic is coming, you don't fight it.
Exactly. You don't fight it. You anticipate it. You let the chaotic energy break the old habits and proactively use that upheaval to restructure the team for the final sprint.
That's brilliant. But I mean, relying on midpoint panic is exhausting.
It really is.
Which leads us to the macro level of this entire operation. We have to zoom all the way out, because this high-performing team doesn't exist in a vacuum.
No, they don't. They are swimming in a highly political corporate shark tank.
We must look at conflict, negotiation, and organizational politics. PMs are, by definition, accidental negotiators, aren't they?
They absolutely are. Because of the matrix structure we discussed earlier, they spend their days fighting for resources they don't own.
And trying to influence stakeholders they don't actually control.
Right. And engineers notoriously despise office politics.
Oh, completely. They're trained in logic, physics, quantifiable truths. Politics is unquantifiable and, frankly, often deeply illogical.
The data reveals a really fascinating cognitive dissonance here. Research shows that successful mid-level managers openly admit that playing office politics is 100% vital to project success.
You simply cannot get a complex product out the door without it.
Right. But by a 4-to-1 margin, those exact same managers find it personally repugnant. They view it as a complete waste of organizational energy.
It's like, I have to do this to survive, but it makes my skin crawl.
Exactly.
So if a project manager hates politics but absolutely has to engage in it to secure resources, is there a bypass valve? Like, can they hack the corporate system?
There is a structural hack. It's called securing an executive champion.
An executive champion. Explain how a champion actually functions day to day.
Well, an executive champion is a high-level sponsor within the organization. Think like a vice president or a C-suite executive.
Okay, somebody with real weight.
Right. And they essentially act as a political bulldozer for the project manager. So imagine a scenario where a PM desperately needs a senior CAD designer.
But a stubborn functional manager refuses to release them from departmental duties.
Exactly. Now, the PM could waste weeks playing politics and negotiating.
Or
the executive champion steps in. Because the champion has immense formal status and raw institutional power, they bypass the negotiation entirely.
they just pull rank.
Yeah, they walk into the functional manager's office and demand the reassignment by fiat. The champion takes on all that political heat,
They clear the organizational roadblocks and run interference.
which allows the project manager to keep their hands clean and focus entirely on the technical execution.
Man, it is literally like having a heavyweight fighter in your corner, so you can just focus on the chess match in front of you.
That's a great way to look at it.
But relying on an executive champion is essentially a band-aid for a broken system, isn't it?
It is a workaround, yes.
If the project manager is constantly begging for resources and needs a vice president to fight their battles, the structure itself is the problem. Are companies actually changing their organizational charts to fix this friction?
Yes, they are. Because this constant baseline friction of negotiation is just so exhausting and inefficient, companies are actively evolving their structural forms.
Evolving how?
We are seeing a distinct shift away from those weak matrix organizations where functional managers hold all the cards and the PM is just a coordinator.
Moving toward what?
Toward what researchers Wheelwright and Clark call heavyweight projectized organizations?
What does a heavyweight organization actually look like for the person running the project?
In a fully projectized organization, the matrix is basically dissolved. The project manager doesn't have to beg for resources or borrow personnel anymore.
So the engineers belong to them.
Yes, the engineers are pulled out of their functional departments and assigned directly to the project manager. The team is dedicated solely to the project.
Wow. And the PM holds complete formal authority over their performance reviews and their daily tasks.
Complete authority. It completely rewrites the behavioral dynamics because it removes that exhausting conflict over resources.
So the entire corporate structure is literally warping and evolving to accommodate the reality of how incredibly difficult it is to manage human beings on a temporary endeavor.
It really is. And it proves the foundational thesis of our whole discussion today.
Which is?
All the innovations in scheduling software, risk algorithms, and organizational design over the last 3 decades are ultimately just attempts to better manage the behavioral side of the enterprise.
Because the math of engineering hasn't changed.
No, the math is the same. Human nature has simply become the ultimate variable.
Which leads us to a highly provocative thought to close out this deep dive. If the data clearly shows that project management is inexorably moving toward the human side, if the real battlegrounds are managing emotions, navigating office politics, sustaining motivation, and breaking down cross-functional rivalries.
Will the ultimate engineering tools of the future be psychological rather than technical?
Exactly. Think about it. We are already seeing artificial intelligence optimizing supply chains. Will we eventually reach a point where AI takes over all the complex math, the pure charts, the risk modeling, and the scheduling algorithms entirely?
It's very likely.
And if the software can flawlessly manage the cold, hard numbers, it leaves the human project manager to exclusively manage human nature. It's something to chew on the next time you open up a spreadsheet and ignore the people sitting right across from you.
A really powerful thought.
Victory belongs to those who refuse to lose. Thanks for riding with me, Design Junkies. Stay hungry. If this episode gave you even one solid takeaway, drop a comment. Takes you a few seconds, but it tells me this workbench is actually helping and worth keeping alive. We don't make a dime off this, and that's by design. As long as it's helping you get sharper, that's enough.